This is our first in-person event in an incredibly long time.
Woo!
It's a great moment, and it's super exciting to just see you all here today. Events like this couldn't happen without our sponsors like Prairie Scan, Innovation Saskatchewan, the University of Saskatchewan, and we actually have a special sponsor for today. We have Agora in the house. Todd from Agora is here today. So this is the first time we've actually done a niche-focused community event. This is marketing-focused. We're considering doing like product or HR next. So if you have any ideas around what the next idea that you would like to learn about, whether it be a niche topic or something like Web 3.0, product, HR, we'd love to hear about that. Just a little bit on the format today. We have about 45 minutes for this panel, and then we'll open things up for Q&A for pretty much as long as anybody has a pretty good question. But yeah, enough of me speaking. Let's kick things off. So without further ado, love to introduce our first speaker. We have Kendall Bishop, who is the founder of Badass Growth Co., a fractional CMO service. Kendall, tell us a little bit what you do.
Is this thing on? I knew it wasn't going to be on.
You gotta turn it on. You get the power button.
Where is it?
Kendall.
I can do it.
Chris, is yours on?
My gel nails are not conducive. Okay, there we go. I didn't know I was going first. I wasn't ready. Okay, so yeah. My background, I started my marketing career in XM, which is experiential marketing, running programs for the Fortune 500 brands across Western Canada, bringing them to life in all the fun places, bars, festivals, and whatnot. I then moved into working with Yelp in a business development, B2B role, really engaging merchants in the platform to try and drive a more viral cycle of review culture in the same market. And then after that, I was visiting my friends in the US a lot, and I discovered this thing called Uber that just shook me to my core. And I came home, and we were just launching in Canada, and I was determined to work there. So I ended up finagling my way into a market launcher and marketing manager role for Western Canada. After which I went back home and joined this small business my parents had never heard of called Skip the Dishes, where I was employee 23, part of the founding team, launched marketing there and rode that train until this spring when I decided to leave. So I had the privilege of taking us from a $250 marketing budget to $160 million marketing budget and all the crazy shit along the way. So hopefully I can share some of my learnings with you guys of what to not do more so probably, because we've failed a million times. But yeah, since leaving, I'm really passionate about working with scale-ups and really usually seed to Series A and helping them kind of get organized and marketing plan, resourcing against the plan, getting to their next milestone. So work fractionally with businesses in the tech-enabled multi-sided marketplace models and kind of just getting started, but really excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Kendall, I heard you had the marketing holy grail. You ran a campaign that got so much traffic, you actually crashed Skip the Dishes site. Let's hear about it.
Okay, so before the John Hamm thing, which ended up being my bigger legacy at Skip, I think, because at Uber we'd have these campaigns that were meant for FOMO, right? So Uber puppies, Uber ice cream, we'd deliver crazy stuff that very few people were actually ever gonna get, but it drove a lot of talkability. So our founder was like, you need to do the same, here. I'm like, okay, that's no problemo. So we did this donut promotion where we were gonna give free donuts to the first 200 customers. They came online and entered this promo code at a certain time on a certain day. So we sent the email to 70,000 users in Winnipeg, which was pretty legit now, I think in the time, right? That was 5 years ago. And I guess we didn't communicate properly with tech because I thought Chris was doing that. And so there was so much traffic on the website at 10:58 because the promo started at 11, and everyone kept refreshing with the same promo code and the same restaurant at the same time with the same payment method. And everyone, I was watching the numbers go up. I'm like, woo, traffic is crazy! And everyone started running. The tech team was screaming. They were running all over the office. They're like, it's down. So the whole network actually crashed in all of our Canadian and American cities, about 50 of them at the time. And I got in so much trouble, but I survived, and I'm here to tell the story. But that was my first legacy. Actually, in the Skip office here, if anyone ever goes in, there's a framed poster on the wall that says December 2nd, 2016, never forget. And it has a picture of a big donut. So my takeaway from there though, honestly, I've never done anything that I don't super empathize with how it could potentially impact someone else, especially tech and product. So I learned the hard way, but if that's a lesson I can spread to the people, that's the one that I do. So we don't have to crash any more products.
Yeah, I love that. So next up, we have Chris. Chris is the Director of Marketing at 7 Shifts. Let's hear a few words of what you do.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I'm going to keep this short because I am a local person and I know lots of the faces in the room. So I'm the Director of Marketing at 7 Shifts. I've been in software most all of my career. I stuck my way into software, like literally, I joined a comp-sci job tour and like slid resumes under doors until somebody hired me. And that's how I got in, and I've loved it ever since. And I was employee 8 or 9 at 7 Shifts when we started, first marketing hire, and like Kendall, have like blown up a lot of stuff verbally and learned a lot of stuff. And yeah, so we're here today and I'm still alive, and that's great.
That's all we can ask for.
Yes. And with that,
Oh, my heart. That was something else. So before I introduce and tell you all about my fabulous biography, can we just soak in the fact that we're with people that aren't our immediate family members right now? And how good that feels? And how we're having casual beers with people that we can network with? Like, damn, that's good. So I'm actually an honorary Prairie member. I'm from Toronto. I know, sorry. But I am Elissa Riddell. My friends and my enemies call me Eli. And I am Director of Branding and Communications at Coconut Software. And we are literally just over there. So I have not always been in startups. I've actually done my career in massive multi-billion-dollar blue chip companies. But I always knew that I wanted to come back to a startup entrepreneurial type role. And the reason why, and I kind of joke, I told 1 or 2 people this story already, but my mom basically started Airbnb before Airbnb was a thing. And she did not figure out how to monetize that. And I am forever so angry with her about that. But she did essentially property management, renting properties specifically for Bermuda. So I literally grew up in a startup. Like, as soon as I could do anything, she was getting me to file paperwork and man the phones, and I created the first website, and I kind of grew up in that world. And then I decided for some reason to get an undergrad in finance and graduated into the 2008 recession. That was a terrible, terrible idea to go into finance at that time. And then I decided that marketing is where I wanted to be, so I went and did what I was supposed to do, and I got my MBA, and I've never touched pretty much any of those skills ever again. But it introduced me to the world of tech. And doing marketing for tech companies, specifically B2B, is such an interesting place. And marketing for B2B companies oftentimes is really considered unsexy and not interesting. And it's kind of like, yeah, you know, you do a couple ads and you're done. And I think that there's a lot of things that we could learn from B2C, really dynamic things that we could then apply to help, you know, sell our particular software, in our case, to banks and credit unions. So I actually don't think I've blown up enough stuff.
It's coming.
So, Kirsty, Bree, like, let's go blow some shit up. But yeah, I think, you know, I was super excited to join this panel because I'm going to be learning so much from you guys. I feel like maybe I should be actually in the audience compared to being up here, but perhaps some of that multi-billion-dollar blue chip company toolkit stuff that I learned would be helpful for you guys as well. So, thanks for having me.
Yeah, 100%. So let's kick things off.
Woo, is that us?
Okay, first question. It's 2021. You're hiring your first marketer. You're 7 shifts. What do you look for in that first marketer? I know you were this person a couple years ago. What are like the skills you're looking for, and what kind of seniority do you think that person comes in at?
So I've answered this question a few times. Like I don't know what that is. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. Like I probably wouldn't hire myself. Now with what I know. You know, I was brought in, and I was really lucky to be brought in because I was like super fired up. And being fired up and like having a lot of passion and a lot of grit and resilience is like really important. But I think the thing that I've learned that is even more important than that is understanding the model of the business that you're coming into. And as a founder, getting the candidates to understand the model or being able to test that they understand the model of the business and hire the right one. So if I was looking to hire, you know, the first marketer at 7 Shifts today, I would be testing to see like, do they understand that this is an SMB product, that it is high velocity, that it is inbound led, that it is a really low ACV, which I told Kendall before is average contract value. Like those features of the business are going to determine the specific marketing strategies and skills that you're going to need and employ to get the job done. So yeah, that's who I would hire first, is somebody with those skill sets to fit the model of your business. And as for seniority, that's a really tricky one, because if you hire too senior, you end up with somebody that has a lot of experience and a lot of strategy who can't really execute or doesn't want to execute anymore. And on the other side, if you hire somebody too junior, they're all guns blazing, but they can't think of the bigger picture. So you have to find somebody in the middle who has probably done it before, maybe not all of it before, but some of it before. They have some set of skills. But then they can also think high level enough that they're able to get the job done.
Yeah, and then, I mean, if we flip that to Elissa, I mean, if you looked at Coconut, which is a fairly different business model, like what would those skills then look like for an organization that's doing enterprise sales like Coconut?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all really just boils down to knowing who your target is and knowing who is your ideal customer profile. And it's funny because we're actually going through a similar exercise right now at Coconut, because we did do some pivoting during the pandemic as to who we sell to. So I think it really comes down to good marketers are people who can tell a very compelling story, and they also know how to tell that story to their audience. So if you're talking to the head of IT at a big bank, the story that you tell that person, and the marketing person who needs to figure out what that story is to equip your sales team, is going to be very different from someone who's trying to sell technology to another startup, for example. But I think when it comes to like figuring out your first marketing hire, you need to have someone that, of course, is going to be able to kind of roll up your sleeves and just get stuff done. But at the same time, you also need that person to be the evangelist of your brand. And they are going to likely be the face of your company for a little while, especially if you are a technical founder or someone who's not particularly comfortable at doing stuff like this. You need to hire a marketing person who's either going to be able to coach you to get more comfortable with that, or they're going to actually be able to take on that role. And so I think that it's really important for you to kind of know, as a founder, what are your strengths and weaknesses? How do you find a marketing person, and frankly, the rest of your leadership team that's going to shore up what those weaknesses are, so you can focus on what you're really good at. And then the other thing would be, thinking about what you want that marketing person to do. Do you need them to really focus in on getting eyeballs to your website right away? Or do you need them to focus in on, getting in front of your audience that don't even know that you exist? Because those are very, very different skill sets. And people have very different training in order to get there. Very long-winded. I'm sorry. I don't get out much.
Does it go beyond the business model? Like, how do you analyze what the organization currently is at? Like, if whether you're 5 people or 10 people or 15, and what current skills are there? Like, how do you actually begin analyzing the actual organization where you're at to figure out what that person looks like, more than just this is what our business model looks like? What are the skills we need?
Is that a follow-up from you?
Yeah, that's for you.
Okay.
Give me this background. I would say, honestly, reach out to your network and see if you have any other marketers you can kind of bounce the idea off of. So one of the things that I see is a lot of new startups hire a whole bunch of generalists who can kind of just get everything done. And then as that startup grows, you actually need to find very niche specializations to do very specific tasks. And the best way of knowing when you're ready for that is to talk to other marketers or other companies that are going through a similar thing. So for example, when I started at Coconut, I didn't have this role. I was director of product marketing. I was the first product marketing person because Coconut leadership realized the skill set that we actually now needed on the marketing team, we didn't have, and we have to go find someone who's done that for their whole career. And so I think a lot of it is also like being grounded, again, going back to what your skills and weaknesses are, and being really, really honest with yourself to say, do I need to have someone who's like, oh, brand, like, we need to do a new logo, like, we need to think about what we make people feel. Like, yes, there's a time and a place for that, but if you actually just need to keep the lights on, you need leads to your website, you need those to convert really well, and then you need to get your salespeople to close that. So just being honest with yourself.
I love that. Yeah, and then Kendall, I mean, if you're looking at either Skip or just a marketplace in general, from your perspective, like, what are you looking for in that first marketer?
Okay, it's on, I think. Yeah, it's interesting because I was our first marketer too, so I've been reflecting on this question, like, how do I answer it? Not saying just like me. No, just kidding. No, but now looking back what I know, and I'm assuming we're talking about in the early stages. I think for us, it was really important in a marketplace model. You're trying to scale multiple sides at the same time. So it's really important to be using channels that are easy to change, whether that means scale up or scale down, and pretty much real time. Like there was times we'd be like, turn off the Google ads, we'd be turning off Facebook ads, which is like the dumbest thing to do. But we'd have to do I wasn't a performance marketer by background. So when I look back and say there's two things. One, I would probably, in a marketplace model where there's almost real-time management of supply and demand, really having someone who's specialized in real-time channels, which are usually digital marketing and performance channels. But there's also, this is more of a trait that I think is really important. Like our model was new back then, like the marketplace model is not so new now, but really having people who are curious and empathetic, because for us, the donut example was great one, but like, you know, if I put out a campaign that got like 5,000 extra orders in a couple days, that was actually awful for our business. If we're not staffed, they're not staffed, they're dependent contractors. If we did not have enough supply to support those new customers, those repeat orders that were coming in. So being able to be really empathetic and knowing that I didn't know everything all the time, and always communicating with the ops team and always over planning and over communicating. I'm sending this one email to these 50,000 people. This is what could happen. Is that okay for you? Like the need was really different because there was such a nuance to keeping a balance. So I think, you know, my biggest flag is when I like hire someone for one of the companies I'm working on, and they're like, oh, this needs to happen. They come in the first week, they're like, this needs to happen. And I'm like, you need to be curious and you should ask 100 questions before you make a reco. So I'm also really big on that as a character trait of someone who's humble, someone who's empathetic, someone who's curious. If you have a new model, like if your model is new and the average marketer is not either used to or familiar at all with operating within it, you're going to want someone who you know is really down to learn. But I would definitely say from a skills perspective, more performance and like real-time demand channels for sure.
Yeah, so those kind of end up sounding like three completely different people. How do you start end up So yeah, if you want to take one takeaway from this, is that you probably have to look at your business model before hiring a marketer. But yeah, like if you want to look at like what is compensation end up looking like for some of these people, like how do you kind of, I mean, you're doing a lot of hiring right now, Kendall, like how are you looking at like compensation for these types of people?
Yeah, that's always so tricky. So let me start with a principle that I like to think about, which is, I think we have a belief, and I've been in the startup community, so although I'm not like in it physically myself operating right now, I think we have a belief that if people really want it bad enough, they'll take less than market, you know, and that should be, and if they really want to be here and they really believe in the company, then like they should be willing to, you know, take a haircut on cash and really buy into our vision and invest in the long term. I think there are people for whom that applies, people who like risk, people who have experience in startups, you know, they thrive on it. But I also think we disqualify a lot of people that would be really good for our business by operating based on that principle. So keeping in mind everyone has cash constraints, like if we were not just making it rain, I get that. But I would say if I was hiring that first marketer again, there's usually, and everyone will say, oh, there's cash and there's bonus and there's equity, and we probably don't have bonus structures in the early days because we're probably focused on growth and that sort of thing. So from a cash perspective, if I had to say what do I think that first marketer probably is their market value, if they were not getting anything else, I would say, I'm gonna throw something out there. 60,000? What do you think?
That's so high.
Is it?
That's so high.
I don't know. I don't usually, but so I hire marketing manager level people for some of my clients who are startups, and we would hire those roles at 70 to 80 grand. But those are not tech startups being incubated. These are startups who have raised money, who have like 3-year projections that we feel we're gonna, you know, return like 7 times growth, et cetera. But I think you could get a good fair market value of 60 to 65 grand, then you could probably actually offset some of that with equity. But I also would share one thing, which was when I joined Skip the Dishes, the founders asked me, how little do you need to live? I'm not kidding. Wow. I'm not kidding. And I was like, oh, like I'm coming, and I wasn't like flexing on my career experience, but I was like, oh, like I'm coming from Uber, like I'm not really looking to just like survive. But so I would just say, regardless of even if that's a mentality, it's just the way you enter into that conversation.
Yeah.
Even if the takeaway is the same, the way you present those words can really make a difference in how the person feels and what they actually might be willing to accept from you. So.
When we were going through these questions on the call, nobody would throw out a number. I was trying to get a number from everybody. Nobody threw out a number, and now we got a number, so I'm super happy about that.
But I would love to hear your answer.
Yeah, Chris, like I'd love to hear your perspective on this one.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like what Kendall mentioned there is like really important, which is the point that when you're hiring for like an early stage marketer, so much of it is on them being like fired up and being excited about the vision of the company and the vision of the product. Because these are people that are gonna have to work really, really hard. And so if they're not like all in, it's gonna be really tough to keep them motivated in the long term.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we did early on in 7 Shifts is that our CEO would have a scale for everyone. He would say, you can get a little more money and less equity, or to the other side, more equity, less money. And it would be up to people to kind of choose, because then it's not like, well, you're taking this huge haircut and deal with it. It's like, well, there's some upside in equity, but there's the other way around too, because people, like you said, Kendall, have cash constraints. But they wouldn't even ever get to that point if they weren't somebody that wasn't really like fired up and excited about the business anyways. And so like motivation and grit and resilience and like a growth mindset were much more important to joining the business than like what a salary would be. And those types of individuals were usually just like, oh, I'll take anything, just give me an opportunity to get in the door. And so
give us a number.
70.
Yes, I didn't go too high.
Yeah, Elissa, do you want to add on to anything to that?
The only thing I would say is when you're trying to make a case, when you're bootstrapped and you don't have a whole bunch of cash and you're trying to make a case like, oh, you work really hard, you get some equity, and one day we'll be a unicorn. Kendall touched on it a little bit. It's coming from a very privileged place to be able to say, yes, I can do that. Like, you're operating on the assumption that person has maybe someone else that can help with the mortgage payment or the rent payment, that they have money in the bank that they could, draw away from because they're not getting a cash influx every 2 weeks or every month or whatever. And like you said, it's potentially reducing artificially, you're handicapping your talent pool because of this concept. So it's a fine balance that you will have to figure out. Like, you can't pay someone so much in salary that you literally can't keep the lights on, but at the same time, know that you're asking a lot of people if you want them to work for very, very little. And by extension, if you do that, there's going to be some semblance or expectation of loyalty. So I would just say that is a bit of a cautionary thing. But it's interesting because compensation, like I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, Facebook was like, oh, well, if you leave California, we're going to reduce your income because you're not in a high cost of living area. And everyone freaking blew up and there was like mutiny, and then they're like, oh, we were joking. And so, kidding, Zuckerberg never jokes. So I would say because of the way the world of work is changing, the Great Resignation, all that good stuff that we're all talking about, the requirement to be in a specific geographic location is being reduced, and therefore it's great for you as founders or as people leading teams because all of a sudden you have a lot more people to draw from. But you also have to be conscientious that it gets very complicated when you have multiple different sliding scales based on their geographic location and therefore what their compensation is. So, you can make the conversation over complex based on geography, whether you need them to be in person versus remote. And again, it's a balance. So coming from Toronto, where everything is freaking expensive, I would say if I were a startup in Toronto, hiring my first marketing person with a kind of fair, typical sort of equity situation, I'd probably be looking at like 60 to 80. And if the person has a whole bunch of experience directly in the industry that I'm trying to build my company in, you might have to go up from there. But again, there's so many different considerations.
Yeah, and just following that up, like when you're looking at that kind of first marketer, like how do you look at the value difference between like generalists versus specialists? Like you all kind of touched on it a little bit, but like how generalist do you look? How specialist do you look at that early stage? And what's kind of the value difference between the two? Elissa, do you want to continue?
Sure, I'm on a roll. It goes back to what your marketing strategy is, and if you're hiring your first marketing person, you probably don't really have a fleshed out marketing strategy, but it's really, you need to sit with yourself, your co-founders, your leadership team, and figure out what do we actually want this person to accomplish. And like I said, if you want to figure out the story of your company and do the large brand type plays, you're going to want to hire someone who has that expertise. If you're cool with that person kind of learning on the fly, figuring stuff out, like how does SEO, SEM work? How do we build a WordPress website? Like those are the sorts of things that anyone with a strong passion and enthusiasm can learn and pretty much execute right away. So I would say if I were a founder hiring my first marketing person, I would probably tend to do more of a generalist and someone who is willing to be like, I don't know how to do that. I'm gonna go ahead and Google that real quick, figure out how to do it and then execute. Unless you have a very good business case to do something very, very specialized. So that's my kind of non-answer to that.
Yeah, and then I mean, Chris, you were kind of talking about a little bit like in 7 shifts, like you eventually surrounded yourself with specialists, but you'd probably consider yourself a generalist. So like, how did 7 shifts kind
Because we
of?
sure do.
Shots fired.
Probably should have double checked and considered yourself a generalist. But yeah, like when you're looking at 7 shifts, then like you pretty much surrounded yourself with specialists. Where Coconut kind of went straight generalist, kind of across the board. Like, how did you end up looking at the value of like? Why were you surrounding yourself with like very specific skill sets as you went?
So when I came into the business, the directive was just do everything you can to make the business grow and succeed. And so that's kind of like a generalist like mandate, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
figure everything out. And I would say that's probably not the right approach to take, in all honesty. But what that meant is that like you do a little bit of everything. And you plug a little in this, you plug a little in this, and as a marketer, you probably have some areas of core competency already. Like maybe it is SEO, maybe it is copywriting, maybe it's content, maybe it's performance marketing, whatever. And so you can over-index and you can go really deep on those things. But eventually you're going to run into this wall where it's like, well, to continue growing and scaling, you need to unlock this channel or that channel or the other thing. And so that's where, okay, well, I can't do it as the first marketer. I need to bring in somebody who can. So I tell this story to people all the time, but like my first hire on the marketing team was a dev. And people are like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, because I could do most of what was needed. But the biggest blocker was that when I wanted to roll code out, I had to take it to our CEO, who would do it at 2 in the morning on Sunday when he only had the time to do it.
Yeah.
And that wasn't sustainable. And so hiring a developer actually allowed us to unlock that capacity to do all those other things that I couldn't do. And so I give that advice to people all the time where I say, do as much as you can, focus on what you can do well. You can, check off that low-hanging fruit. And then once you get to the point where you're like, this is super important for the business, but I can't do it, that's where you hire somebody. And that's where that specialization comes into play. So it's like a dev is a specialty to a weird degree. Or, and then the person after that I hired was a content person because I'm not the strongest writer. And there was a lot of opportunity there. And after that, I was a designer. And after that, I was a performance marketer. And eventually, like where we are today, we've got this team of about 16 people. And most of them have a deep specialization. Like I've never hired somebody that's like marketing coordinator, marketing specialist, where it's just like you're gonna do a little bit of everything because everyone has a role to play. So it's very much like the Avengers. Everyone's kind of getting together with their own unique special power.
So then, like as an organization, did you look at it as like, okay, we're doing PPC now, but we're not touching SEO or email, and then it's like, okay, we're hiring an SEO person, so now we start doing SEO. Like, were you just kind of ignoring those other channels until you hired a specialist for it, or how did you look at those?
Yeah, I want to say that I wasn't ignoring them, but yeah, I probably was. But it's that stack rank prioritization, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what is the thing that could have the biggest impact for the business? Well, okay, it's SEO. Well, let's fix that problem. Okay, well now it's performance marketing. Let's fix that problem. But you have to be kind of like real with yourself too as a generalist to say like, I actually can't learn performance marketing. Like, I hate Google ads. I hate Facebook ads. I'm not going to do that. And so, like, let's find somebody who's super smart that can do it and is really passionate about it.
Great, I love that.
I have a thought. Can I add one thought to that?
Absolutely.
It's just because it's really related. So I think there's something interesting about when you think about building your team and who you actually want to hire in-house and hiring your first marketer, knowing now the way of working is changing. There's a lot of contractors, there's a lot of agencies. Sometimes that might be your better solution. So let's say in my case, I was hiring the performance marketer. If I would do it again, I would make sure I hired someone who has the proven ability to like successfully manage stakeholders, set priorities, make sure those priorities are delivered on. Other than just like they don't have to be a manager, like they've led a team, but they are going to. And I think that then mitigates a little bit of like, do we need to hire someone for SEO? How much SEO do we really need to do? Is it really going to be worth it? Do we just need an audit? Well, you need someone that you can trust that is like, this is what good looks like. Work with this partner to get it done. And as much as that is it's a softer skill, but I think it'd be really important because you can, for performance especially, you can find some really smart, for every area, but performance also, you can find some really smart, super analytical, super left brain people, but if they can't have an expectation conversation and and hold other outside parties accountable, then you lose like a big opportunity. So that would be something I might add too.
Yeah, to follow that up then from Chris, like, did you ever explore the freelancer, contractor, fractional model, or did you just end up straight, okay, employee 2, employee 3, employee 4?
To be totally honest, no, we never thought about it once because we wanted people completely dedicated to our business. And having had some experience working in agencies, I was like, oh, well, when I give you work, you're going to think about it for 5 minutes, part of the first idea, and then pass it over to me as revolutionary. And like maybe I'm jaded from that. But like, I'm obviously jaded. But it's. I want people who are fully dedicated and allocating every brain cell they have to thinking about the business. So I know I'm not going to get that from an agency. I can potentially get that from a freelancer because if it's going to be paid on like a contractual basis or like a project basis, they're not going to get the next project if it's not good. So yeah, I stayed away from agency, but we definitely employed freelance where necessary.
Yeah, I mean, Elissa, you're the brand person in all of this. When it comes to like freelancers and contractors, how do you think that ends up affecting like the brand then? How do you have them focus on they're not only going to be focused on Coconut if they are in that kind of fractional capacity. So how do you ensure that they're true to the Coconut brand, which you've obviously spent so much time crafting and perfecting?
Yeah, so quick disclosure, I've been director of brands and comms for 3 months. Everyone in the marketing team helps with the brand, but it hasn't been what I lived and breathed. So my predecessors, big ups. Kirsty, amazing designer. She's the reason why I'm wearing the Sick shirt tonight. But in all seriousness, I've forgotten the question.
With Coconut, I mean, obviously brand is essential to what you're building at Coconut. Would you ever worry that hiring a fractional person or a contract person would affect the overall brand?
That really helped my personal brand right there. So Exhibit 8, don't do that. So I would say freelancers I consider different from kind of like an agency view. So freelancers are folks that probably have done this a lot and they've gotten sick of the corporate world. They want to kind of do this on their own terms. They're probably building up their own book of business. They're going to be very, very, in my experience, very incentivized to do a very good job. Agencies, I kind of agree. Like, I haven't had a whole bunch of like, oh my God, that agency was incredible. Like, wow, they did a fabulous job. It's a lot of, in my personal opinion, micromanaging. Micromanaging a bunch of people that I'm like, do I really need to like explain to you how a meeting needs to be run? Like, this is crazy. So this is, and again, to be clear, not my experience with Coconut, this is separate. But what I would say is, if you find great people, and they happen to be at an agency, they happen to be freelancer, they happen to be in-house, you do what you can to develop that relationship and keep it really, really strong. And I think brand is one of those things that is so fragile. It's this beautiful flower that you have to be so careful of, because if you do anything, it can take a long time for that to come back. So if you hire an agency to do your website for you and it's late and delayed and broken and all the rest of it, like, it's going to take a while for your brand to get back to where it was. So if you go that route, talk to your network. Like, you have an incredible network here at Co.Labs. You have a bunch of people who are going through the same sort of situations. whole other people to figure out what you need to do. And then just go in eyes wide open to realize that you can hire someone and they can be a complete freaking dud as well. It doesn't matter like what kind of gig they have. Be very conscientious with who you're choosing and why you're choosing them.
Okay, so we definitely know how some people feel about agencies. Kendall, do you want to kind of retort this one? I guess you would probably consider Badass co
No, we're not an agency. We're fractional advisory practice.
Oh, thank God.
That's my brand. But no, maybe I'll just give it, and it's not that I disagree with those things, because those things definitely do happen, but maybe I'll just give a different perspective that I have had, that just so everyone can get a full circle. So I agree, there are agencies that will not deliver on your expectations. I learned the hard way that it is your accountability to manage that agency, just like you would manage anyone on your team, anyone that's an extension of your team, and you treat them as such. Like, just because they're your agency doesn't mean they get to take flyers and do what they want to do and waste your time and all these other things. So I would say if you do engage in an agency experience and you don't have a good experience, don't let it shut it down for you for life, and really pay attention. Why did that fall apart? Like, I've had some where I looked, and luckily we didn't have to part ways, but I was like, I fucked that up. Like, that was me. That was my fault. And not suggesting that it's always your fault as the client, but really setting clear expectations, asking for lots of communication. The good thing with the agency that's a little different to an employee, you're like, Amanda, this isn't quite what I was looking for. Help me understand what the issues were that prevented you from, like, you're managing this person, you're trying to, really motivate them and develop them. With an agency, I'm like, I'm paying you big bucks. Like, this is not what we asked for. You're not delivering on my expectations, and I need to understand how that's going to be, how you're going to fix that. Like, and the communication becomes different. So I just think, but also I've been in the business I worked with the most agencies on was we were dealing with such large, wild amounts of money and wild amounts of exposure that the other option was to build that in-house, and that was just not a scalable, good solution for us. Like, our media budgets were, tens and tens of millions of dollars. So, but there's also brand agency. There's this subjective world, and I was the brand owner as well, so I can empathize with that. Like, the way you might feel about the brand work, there's so much subjectivity, whereas the way you might feel about the media plans and the ROI you're getting on your investment is black and white. So there's another world there. Like, I was up with the agency until 2 in the morning rewriting John Hamm scripts, bawling my eyes out because they were so bad, and like, we had to ship them and we had to go shoot. And I was not pleased, but there's also that option. Hey, you're really not happy? Shit's gotta go. You get in there and you fix it yourself, and then you deal with the relationship after. So I would say there's definitely both sides of the coin. But sometimes it can be a better use of your time than if you only have, let's say you're lucky and you have $500,000 in marketing salaries or to invest. Do you take 100 of that and buy a really good full-time digital media manager who has bought media before, or do you spend less than that but on an ongoing basis with an agency who that is all they do all day, every day for dozens of clients? They're learning stuff, they're incentivized to have best practices and that sort of thing. So different fits for different companies. Don't be scared of it, but when you do try it out, I hope everybody tries it at least once, know that like you are in control, you set the expectations, and that it's as much your responsibility as the agency's to make sure that you're getting what you want. So.
Yeah, and it also comes to, I think, like adding just that layer of capacity and getting a chance to test things out. Like, I don't know if Chris or Elissa, you've ever kind of gotten this opportunity, but it's like, hey, we're not sure whether PPC or SEO or social is going to be effective. Like, let's give somebody a month contract and see how it goes. Like, have you ever run kind of those types of contracts?
Yeah, we have. But we've gotten to the scale now where, you're ruthlessly prioritizing what's best for the business, and it's like, oh, there's 2 things that are really like juicy bets, and you want to do them both, but there's not enough hours in the day for your team to do it. So it's like, well, this is actually a great opportunity for somebody outside to be able to take that on, so you can, increase your capacity. That's where we found it valuable, but it's like only under very certain conditions where it's like, what needs to be done, you just need another set of hands, and they can just go and do it. That's like the conditions under which it seems to work really best, in our experience anyways.
I might also say agility of capacity. So if if you're unsure, if your budget might super flex, if you're like, we might spend I'm trying to use the right numbers, 5,000. We might spend 85,000 this month. It really depends. We might need to flex really fast. And if we do need to flex and we need a different campaign out there, like the good thing with agencies is you can flex that time. If you only need a fifth of the services this month and you know you're going to need 5 times next month, you set that expectation and it gets delivered on, versus like, shit, we need to 5x our digital media capacity in the next 30 days, which is just puts unnecessary pressure. So maybe another use case or disqualifier for like businesses to look at.
Okay, so I think we've gone through like first marketer, we've run through contracts and agencies. Maybe somebody can switch us up to like, what does it look like after first marketer and it's time to start adding people? Like Elissa, do you want to start? Like, what's like the quantitative and qualitative signs you look for as to when it's time to start adding marketer 2, 3, 4? Number 10 too as well.
When you're on Slack at 6 p.m. on a Friday and everyone is still online, usually a good indication that something has to give. Either you need to reprioritize better or you need to hire more bodies. And I laugh because that's definitely me. But I would say, one of the principles that we're actually on the team going to be implementing shortly is Agile in marketing. And so our engineering and product teams obviously work two-week sprints, and they have those philosophies. And what that really does, and we're just starting down the journey of that, what that does is it really makes you think about the work that has to be done, your estimate as to how long that's going to take, and then, presumably you have 40 hours in a week to get that work done. Like, if you have too many tasks, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to go over. So I think that by having kind of, again, maybe the theme of tonight is just being really truthful to yourself, would be if you are finding that you are working way too long over your expectations and people are scrambling, the quality is going down, you're all over the place, like those are, I would say, lagging indicators that you probably need to hire some more people. And not to beat the dead horse, but I think like it depends on what you want to get out of it. Like if you realize you have a couple of generalists and you're like, we actually, like for Coconut, one of the big things that we're thinking about is how do we ramp up our content? Because the way that banks and credit unions, whom we sell our software to, the way they tend to like to buy is they like to read and they like to understand the perspective that you bring and what are the key insights that you're able to deliver that no one else can. And for a little while I was doing the writing, and you could tell because I'm not a writer. And we realized, like, holy smokes, it's time for a copywriter. Like, we do actually need to hire someone that has these skills. So when you've really solidified what that strategy is, so hopefully your first marketing hire will be able to plan that out. What is your marketing strategy? Figure it out at least for the first 6 months, if not more. And then once that's uncovered, if you realize, okay, it's going to have to be really content heavy because the people that buy from me love reading blog posts or listening to podcasts, then you have a hiring map. Like then okay, if a lot of our ideal people listen to podcasts and you don't have anyone that has production experience or is able to create that content, then by golly, unless you have a freelancer who's able to do that for you, that's probably going to be your next hire. So I think that just being planning things out as much as you can to have a good realistic view as to what you can accomplish in the however many hours a week that you've set aside for yourself. If you find yourself going over that, if your team's getting overworked, then you gotta hire more people. And I have lots more stories I can tell you over a beer after when this is not recorded.
Am I right?
And taking that, like Kendall at Skip, you probably ended up hiring like massive amounts of marketers at one time. Like you probably couldn't strategically plan out every single hire. How did you end up looking at things then when things were kind of just like at hyper growth?
Well, anyone who attended my workshop earlier knows I love planning. So so I guess we started with one, which was me in 2016, and when I left, we were at about 57 as a team of marketers. So we did not do a good job at planning ahead. So I know that's a luxury we have once we're out of startup survival mode, so I'm trying to move my brain back a few years. But we started with, I guess, anchoring the new areas of marketing first. So instead of saying, hey, on the brand team, like I was the every team, but I guess like we need a photographer and a designer. Instead, we started, we had like one creative person, and then we had one partnerships person, and we had one email marketing person, and then we realized how much they all now need enough content. We need a graphic designer, we need one copywriter. We slowly just we set like a foundation in all the teams. So we had branding campaigns, creative team, partnerships, digital, and then we just kept scaling the teams almost in tandem. But again, earlier we talked about seniority. We probably started at like the mid to low level seniority, a little lower than was probably productive for us. So, but I would say if you know your 6-month plan-ish, or at least your goals, and you can back into from those goals, like how do we actually plan to achieve these? And then, because by the time you get a posting out in the market, it's usually, I'm gonna say, at least 40 days before you get someone starting. So keeping that in mind, by the time you need it, it's too late. So how can you be like a little bit proactive, which I know feels like really out of reach sometimes, but just keeping that in mind.
And I'd love to flip this to Chris and Elissa. Like you're both at like Series B stage now. Like have you started thinking about like management talent? Like I think Coconut just hired like a CMO. Like when does that decision start happening? Where you move from like individual contributors to hey, we need to start thinking about like who is actually going to manage all of these people?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic, and this actually jumps off what Kendall said, but also what Kendall did, because our philosophy has always been like the first person you hire in a functional area should have the capabilities to kind of grow a team around themselves. So your first designer should be able to grow a team of designers around them. First copywriter should be able to do the same thing and scale up, because when they're first and they're early on, they're super scrappy and they're learning a lot, and that learning velocity is going to help them grow as leaders. And so that's always been my philosophy about growing out those functional areas within marketing. And once you get to the point where there's like a few people, what just naturally happens is that team lead, that first person, is just playing more of like an air traffic controller role. And they're distributing work, they're reviewing work. And so that hierarchy kind of like naturally happens. And so within our organization, it has happened already where we have our first designer that has become our design team lead, and she's leading that, and she's now making the decision to hire more designers. Our first writer, same thing. Our web developer doesn't want to be a manager, but she's our senior web developer, and she reviews the code for all the other devs. And it's a really nice way to grow, and it feels like a really natural way to grow. But the thing that's important is you have to be super intentional about it. You have to set that as a ground rule that you have the capacity to grow your career as like the first person, but that's kind of like you're now held to a higher level, a higher standard.
So we talked a little bit when we were having our conversation about like hiring mistakes, and it seemed like a common hiring mistake there was like over titling. So how do you make sure that that individual you're bringing in, you're not hiring them as the CMO of your 3-person startup when you know they're not going to become your CMO in 3 years? How do you end up looking at that then, Chris?
Yeah, so when it comes to hiring, and specifically like titles, a lot of it is on gut, and a lot of it is just frankly on like what the person's experience is. Like if they have a year of marketing experience, like I'm sorry, but you're not a CMO. I see these early stage startups all the time. It's like VP marketing, like fresh out of school. I know how to use a Twitter account. It's just not like really appropriate. And so a lot of it has to do with like experience. It has to do with kind of maturity. It has to do with what they can bring to the table. And a lot of it then just comes down to gut as what you think would be right.
And Elissa, do you want to run that with just like hiring red flags or like some of the main like hiring mistakes you personally made? You don't need to name names.
No, I won't. No. I think it's kind of a toss-up, right? Because you want to hire for cultural fit, and you also want to have the technical skills, right? So I'm always the kind of person that will hire someone who has the right attitude, who's curious, who's motivated, who's smart, who takes notes, who learns from other people, but who needs to develop their technical skills, because that's something that we can train for and we can develop for. I think sometimes you run into the risk where, especially with the delay, you're like, oh shit, I need a copywriter. I'm hiring today. You actually needed that person like 6 months ago, and so you're the first person that kind of comes through the door that ticks all the boxes. You're like, yeah, okay, whatever, we'll just hire this person. And I think that like sometimes it works great, and other times it's like, ooh, damn, not such a good idea. But I think that when given the choice between someone who's highly technically proficient or who has the skills that this role entails, but doesn't have the attitude, won't be a good cultural fit with, you know, the philosophies that you're trying to establish in your company, I would always go with the non-technical person, because they can do some, you know, Coursera's and stuff, right? Like marketing's super easy. You can learn it in like a weekend, right? But yeah, I would say, you know, the over-titling is hilarious. Like coming out of school, half my class went into banking. They were all VPs, and I was like, bro, you barely showed up to class. Like, how are you a VP in this bank? But I think it's important, because that overinflation, like you're going to be battling that for years to come. When everyone at your company is a VP and no one's actually in the trenches doing the work and they want the VP roles, like it's tough. So that's part of the thing where I think sometimes titles are kind of thrown around as okay, we can't give you the salary you want, but we'll give you the title. You have to be very conscientious, particularly as you probably don't have a fully developed HR team, that this will become HR's problem in a couple years when you grow. And then you're gonna have to go back and you're gonna have to look at your salary bands and your titles and what are the career ladders. You're gonna have to go back from there. So like, yeah, that'd be a future Eli problem, and she'll deal with it when she gets there. But just know that it will cause you some consternation that you gave everyone a VP title ahead of time. So that's my piece on that.
And Kendall, do you want to move us beyond just like over titling? What are the other kind of hiring red flags or kind of issues you had in general when hiring?
I feel like I just learned consternation. I don't know what that
That's
means.
like a $10 word.
Yeah,
That's why you flew me out here.
so I would say adjacent to the over-titling actually is just the over-hiring. So we had a lot happen at Skip, not my hires, but happened around me. Was like, we're like, this guy's like this badass business development, whoever, like they're so good. My friend has a startup and they're like, yeah, we just brought on this designer that used to work for Coca-Cola. I'm like, you're doing 15 orders a day. Like, but so the problem can become you bring in someone who's just not ready and not familiar with your environment. So especially in a startup, it's chaos, right? Like, you don't always know what good looks like. You don't always know what you're supposed to be doing. You're gonna have all your resources pulled away. You're gonna be told to go deliver some fucking orders. And so just making sure that you're hiring people and you're super honest about the environment. Like I think there was times we overpromised. We were sharing what we wished for. You know, we operate this way, and we brought in people who like someone. He's actually amazing, so I'll say his name. Or actually I won't say his name, but he's from Saskatchewan, so that's why I can't say it. But he's like so amazing, and he came and joined, and it was just it was too much of a shit show that he couldn't be successful, and that was our problem. That's our fault. So aside from over-titling to like make up for something or give someone what they want, like if you're hiring someone that you're like, this person is fucking badass, and you're in a very startup stage, like really, really think twice and say like, have they operated in an environment like ours before, aside from what have they just been able to achieve with a brand or with performance marketing or any type of role. So really, really challenge yourself if you're hiring someone who has like a huge CV and is super established if they haven't been successful in an environment like yours before. That's what I would say.
I just want to jump in on that.
Yeah,
just
for sure.
say one thing is like one of the things that I've learned is most important over the years when it comes to hiring is the importance of case studies as a part of the hiring process. Like, you will be blown away by how many candidates that you think are amazing because they charm you in that first or second interview, and then you do like a case study where they actually have to put words into action, and you're like, they have no idea what they're talking about. Like, it is so fundamentally important that you add case studies to your hiring. And you know what? Sometimes it'll be where somebody's like, maybe they're not that good, and then they do a case study and they just kill it. And you're like, okay, wow, maybe they weren't good at like really selling themselves, but they obviously know what they're talking about. And so that is really, really important. It's something I cannot recommend enough.
So can I?
Just general advice on like take-home assignments and hiring in general. I'd love to dive into.
So it's funny. The last time I was on a plane was to come to Saskatoon for my interview at Coconut. So then coming back, like, oh my God, it's been like a year and a half. This is crazy. I need to come to Saskatoon when it's not the winter also. I was flown out to Saskatoon. I had to do a full case study. It was a 4-hour interview with the entire leadership team. And part of the reason was I tend to do well in interviews. I am the charmer. but I'm actually also pretty good with cases as well, so that's good. But they needed to know that. I needed to prove it, especially when this is going to be the first product marketing hire. Like, if they messed up and hired the wrong person, that would have set that function back and the marketing team back a while. And so I appreciated the fact that they were making me do this case study. Like, it was a lot. I agonized over it for a full week. But the fact of the matter is that also there, in that circumstance, you're seeing how that important hire is going to gel with the rest of the team. And you can see, when the hard questions are lobbied at them, like, how are they handling it? Like, are you able to develop good chemistry with the folks in the room? And especially if you're at an early stage hiring, your first marketer or second marketer or what have you, like, you're going to be spending a lot of time with that person. You want to make sure that you like them as an individual, and that they're going to work with you. So I think that that's it's super important. And to your point, like, I have done a couple of hires that had case studies and didn't have case studies, and every time it didn't have a case study, it was like, am I a gambling woman? I'm gonna take a chance, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
And is it kind of just default, like if they don't want to do the case study, we're not hiring them, end of story? Like it's essentially mandatory?
They would have to be a very persuasive marketer to say, I'm not doing a case study, but you should still hire me. I'd be like, if you can do that, you're actually going to go to the sales team. You're clearly going to be able to convince people to buy our software. I would say, and again, this is coming from a point of privilege where I was able to have childcare, to fly out to Saskatoon, to do a 4-hour case study, to take off time from my job to be able to make that investment. And if I weren't as privileged as I am, that would have eliminated me from the running. So again, got to be careful with what you're asking of your candidates, the investments that you're making. But I think that, there's ways that you can get around it. I mean, obviously with Zoom, that eliminates the travel, that helps a little bit that way. But when you're asking people to do a big investment, like, make sure that they're one of your top candidates. Don't give a case study to 10 people. Like, narrow it down, make sure that you're investing in them, because they're also investing in you to try and blow your socks off so you hire them.
And following up on this with, hiring and red flags and over-titling, like, how do you start looking at, like, it might be time to let somebody go? And it's not a fun conversation anybody wants to have. It's not a great time, but, like, I'm sure we've all been there where it's been time to let someone go. Like, how do you look beyond kind of the numbers that, like, this person's just not working out in marketing? Anybody can take that one if they want to
Coming in with the heavy.
Let me start by saying anytime you feel you have to fire someone, it should never be a surprise. That's like a baseline principle. So aside from and a lot of times in startups, we don't have them. We're not like, you didn't hit your quarterly metrics, like, because we're moving at a freaking 1,000 miles an hour. So I'm big on attitude, like hired for aptitude and attitude, and like sometimes, I don't know. To be honest, I haven't really had to fire that many people because I hire pretty good. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I might say, for sure, when the effort starts lagging, like when the soul is no longer there, I think that's when you start to be concerned. But I really have a leadership point of view of, like, if I bring you in here and you're not successful, that's actually my fault. And so if I have to fire you, I am doing, obviously, you a disservice, but I've done you a disservice by even allowing you to not spend time, but like make the investment here in an environment that wasn't successful. So when I think it might be time to start firing someone, I don't know if that's the right verbiage, I really give myself a long, hard look first. Like, is the expectation clear? Like, some people need super clear expectations that you might think is so ridiculous, but that might be what they need. Do they know what good looks like? Are they struggling? Like, I had an employee who was doing some really, really weird stuff, like hanging up on me on the phone, like doing all sorts of crazy things that I was just like, I know something is wrong outside of this circumstance. And now it's my accountability to figure out to provide the right resources and inquire enough to say, like, I've noticed you're not being yourself, like, I want to help you, as opposed to being like, you hung up on me. Like, there's a lot of people who would just fire someone for that right away. So the leadership principle for me is, like, care first. I read something once that said, if you find a way to love everyone that works for you, you will work that much harder to help make them successful, and you'll be able to harness that. So I am lucky. I haven't really had to fire anyone. I think I've convinced people that maybe they were looking for something different. And but I also think that's an interesting conversation to have as well. You say, hey, listen, like, we've been talking about this. I think if we're both clear, like, the expectations are not being met, or you really don't seem to be enjoying it here, like, do you want to have a conversation about whether this is the role for you and whether you're happy, and let people choose to leave with dignity. Again, it could be a privilege to not need a severance, you know, but sometimes those conversations just, imagine wanting to quit your job but being so painfully anxious that you can't do it, and someone actually opens that door and says, like, let's have a really honest conversation. And that's how I like to manage. I never, like, if it feels frictiony when you leave, I feel like you maybe haven't done enough as a leader. That's my perspective. But.
And I feel like bad for what I'm going to say now, because Kendall is like so like, oh,
No, it's just, that's the point.
so
Say
much.
yours.
Well,
Yeah,
And I'm like, here's my framework for firing.
Yeah, Chris, you're like the data guy though, right? You have like a very comprehensive spreadsheet of all this stuff.
It's so the way I look at it is something that's been taught to me just basically through the organizational framework we use, which is called EOS, and it's this framework called like GWC. It's called get it, want it, have the capacity to do it. And so it's like, does this person get their job? Binary, like yes or no. And if they don't, like, what can you do to like help them get their job? Like to Kendall's point, like what can you do as the manager, as the founder to help them out? You know, do they want it? Like, do they actually want this job? And that is sometimes like you have to just be like really direct with them. It's like, hey, like, does this fill your sales? Like, do you want this? Or is something else calling to you? Like maybe there's something else within the organization. Maybe you're hired on as product marketing manager and you're like, you know what, brand floats my boat. You know? Or capacity, right? So maybe they're being stretched too thin. Maybe they're being brought in as a content person, but they're spending all their time designing stuff. And you can solve that for them, and you're going to make them a really good team member. And like, if you can't solve those things, GWC, get it, want to have the capacity to do it, like, then it might be time for an exit. But in my experience, like, you're going to know in your gut. You're going to, like, I don't really ever encounter people where they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I hired that person. I can't believe I let that person go. Maybe it is people rationalizing it to themselves, but almost always it was the right decision. And so if you know, you know.
I feel like you're talking about a relationship.
It's not me, it's you.
Unfortunate relationships have been rationalized.
I mean, I don't have much to add. I think both of you guys really really nailed it. I think that, you know, it's how you manage people is going to depend on a couple of different things. Like, is this a new role for them? Have they never done this before, or have they done it before? Are they new to the company, or have they been here before? And it's kind of like, you know, if there's someone that's been here but they haven't done it, you're going to have to manage them in a very different way than someone who's been in the same role for 10 years. They know what they're doing. You can take more of a hands-off approach. And I think oftentimes where the friction and where some of the like, oh, I want to quit, or like, oh my God, I got to fire this person, is where those management styles aren't linking up very well. The other thing I would say is it's marketing, I think, used to have the reputation of being very gut driven. So like, ooh, this ad feels good. I really think that we should go in this direction. Like, my brain is telling me, like, let's do this. My heart is telling me something else. And marketing's not like that anymore. Like, it really, really isn't. And you have to do a business case. You have to justify what you're doing. You have to figure out what are your metrics for success. You got to figure out how you're actually going to measure those things. Like, gone are the days where it's like, you know, Mad Men having some whiskeys and coming up with a campaign. Like, no, we're crunching numbers on Excel, folks. Like, it's really serious. So I think that having those measurable, you know, you hear them, the SMART goals, so specific, measurable, actionable, blah, blah, blah. Making sure that you have those in place for your entire team, but especially marketing, will just keep everyone kind of progressing the way that they need to hit the goals that they have to. And if you do have situations where the goals that you had set out for yourself and for your team, they're not being met, it's figure out why. And if you get to the point where you're having to have these conversations on a regular basis, like, then you have to get into, okay, let's book some time, let's walk through this together. What do you need from me to clear the obstacles to make sure you're gonna get to where you have to go? So yeah, I would say, like, I totally agree. Like, when it's time to fire someone, like, you've been agonizing it over months. But honestly, sometimes it's better to just let that person do something else, and in retrospect, they'll probably, hopefully, thank you for releasing them.
I just wanted to add in just two things. Like, one is that when you hire somebody, being able to set like toll gates for that person's success. So what is their 30-day, their 60-day, their 90-day plan? What are the toll gates that they're going to hit to make sure that they're a fit for the role and they're super equipped for success? Like if you're not doing that, you're doing yourself and them a disservice, because it's like, is this person doing a good job? And you're just like, you know, going by your gut. The other thing too is like, try to set some sort of quantifiable measure for success with them as an individual. The first performance marketing leader we ever hired, like we were super low on cash, but we knew it was important. And we basically sat our candidate down and we said, look buddy, like, I know you want a lot of money and we're willing to pay you a lot of money, but we've crunched the numbers, you need to drive this many leads to pay for yourself. And we're like, he's not gonna go for this. And he was like, I can absolutely do that. We're like, okay. And like a month in, he was like paying for himself like multiple times over. And it was like, amazing. This is the hire I want.